so Tanner, how long have you been an open source contributor?
That is a good question. Let's go look at my GitHub.
I think one of your early, I think it was something around 2017, but I'm not sure if there's probably something that went even earlier back.
Oh, I'm going to have to click more for a long time. Let's see, github.com/. It says I have been, let's see. Oh, here we go. We got a timeline now.
Live on YouTube as well. So I think we can get started now.
All right, awesome. Sorry, Tanner, you were saying?
Oh, I found a way to like look up how long ago, like events from really far in the past. So 2015, let's see, 2015. Yeah, 2015. Let's go back to 13.
Wow, so way back.
Yeah, let's see. I had let's see, 01 to 12. 01. Let's see if there's anything there. My very first open source contribution was on, like, it was around October. No, yeah, it was around October 2013.
Wow. Okay, so that's nearly a decade now that you've actually been in open source.
In it, I wouldn't say in it, but I mean, yeah, I joined that long ago and started contributing, but I really have only been in it for probably 6 or 7 years.
Okay, awesome. Great. I think we're live, so how about we get started?
Okay.
So, hey everyone, I'm Nikhil. I'm the founder of Appsmith. For those of you who don't know, Appsmith is an open source low-code tool to build internal applications. You can use reusable widgets inside the platform to quickly build UI without needing to know HTML, CSS. You can connect to any REST API or database out of the box. And you can even write JavaScript to wire all of this up together. You can then just hit a button and deploy your application without any pre-existing deployment infrastructure needed. And with me today, I have Tanner Linsley, who is a longtime open source contributor, as we've just found out, who is supercharging the React ecosystem with some popular projects like React Table and React Query. Tanner, I'll leave it to you to introduce yourself.
Hello. Yeah. I am an open source developer. I also have a startup called Nozzle. You can go check it out. It's nozzle.io. And I also kind of have this branding umbrella around my open source projects called the Tan Stack. So all of my open source work is kind of being rolled into that open source umbrella. So you can go to tanstack.com and look at all that stuff there. And yeah, I've been doing open source for, I think we just discovered I've been doing it for about 6 or 7 years fully, like, you know, really deep into open source. But I signed up on GitHub like about 10 years ago. So I don't know. It's, you know,
yeah.
I can't really tell like when can you say, oh, I started doing open source on this day? I don't. That's kind of a hard question, but.
I'm just, you talked about like Nozzle. So is that also to do with open source, or is that completely separate from all your other open source contributions?
That's completely separate. Nozzle, I co-founded Nozzle with 2 other friends and about 6 or 7 years ago. And Nozzle is a rank tracker for SEOs. So if you're an SEO and you want to track rankings, you should use Nozzle. We essentially are reverse engineering Google. So Google goes out and scrapes the internet. Well, we go out and scrape Google. So.
Wow, that's really cool. So, I mean, what I'm hearing is basically, you know, you have this whole thing called Nozzle, and on top of that, you find open source so important, that you've dedicated a huge chunk of time to actually contributing back to it, and growing this open source ecosystem. So I'm just really interested to hear your views. Appsmith is open source, so we really believe in open source. So we know why it matters. But I just want to hear from you. Why do you think open source is so important, for the developer ecosystem?
Open source is important because, I don't know, I'll tell you what it was important to me. As an early developer, it was difficult to be productive, thinking that I had to build everything on my own, right? If you're just given a programming language and limited skill set, limited knowledge, it's very difficult to build something that you can ship without either learning how to build everything yourself, or getting help somehow. And for me in the early days, that was why I turned to open source, because I needed help. I needed to, I wanted to use libraries from people who were smarter than me and who solved solutions better than I ever could, and who were providing tools to help, me, a brand new JavaScript Angular developer at the time, to build an awesome application. My very first introduction into open source was with Ionic, and Ionic is a fantastic tool.
Yeah.
And with very limited knowledge of JavaScript and tooling in Angular, I was able to build and ship an app to the App Store. And to me, that's the power of open source, is that there's an entire world of help and tools and knowledge at your disposal, for you to build whatever you want.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's something that we also really believe in, which is, I think we're taught as developers, programmers, that hey, reusable code is good, modular code is good, and to me, open source is just an extension of that, which is, hey, let's build on top of each other's work. Let's not start from scratch. Let's help future developers get there faster. And to be very honest, Appsmith could not have been built if we didn't rely on the entire open source ecosystem. We rely on projects like React tables, in fact, to build Appsmith. We rely on projects like React DND for our drag and drop interactions. We rely on projects like Code Mirror for our coding interface. And all of these are really integral parts, and there's no point in reinventing the wheel. We really just look at it as trying to make use of all these beautiful pieces of software that are already built. And the other really interesting reason that we really believe in contributing back, apart from the great karma points that we get, is just that we want Appsmith to become like a core part of your tech stack. And open source software is so great because you hardly need any approval for it. It's really easy to just adopt. It's so simple to audit. Like you're saying, you're a junior developer and you kind of picked it up, right? And that's what we really envision, that software should be like that. Anybody, whether you're junior, senior, doesn't matter. Starting out, experience, shouldn't matter. You should just be able to quickly adopt it and sort of take it forward. And that's why we're really bullish about open source as well. But while open source has been around for so long, lately we are hearing a lot more about this whole build in public movement, right? And now you could possibly say that open source is sort of like the build in public, but the build in public has kind of put in a sort of spin on it, where they're talking about communicating more things. So I just want to know, what's your thought about this whole build in public movement?
I'm actually not very familiar with it. I'm assuming it's people building their products in a more open fashion, right? So
yeah,
sharing and showing code. I mean, I think it's great. There's definitely different pros and cons depending on what industry you're in, and also the nature of your technology, right? Clearly, there's some things that will always be proprietary for businesses and companies, and there's other parts that don't need to be proprietary. While I don't fully understand all the ins and outs of the movement, I guess one thing I could add to, I guess what we're talking about is my approach to software and open source software at Nozzle isn't necessarily fully let's build Nozzle out in the open. But in a way, all of the open source projects that I've built have come about because of some requirement that I have in Nozzle. It's a startup. There's difficult problems to solve, whether those are, state, charting, tables, whatever. I needed to solve those problems. And instead of solving those problems and keeping them proprietary, there isn't really too much benefit to keeping those types of things proprietary inside of Nozzle, especially when the nature of the front end ecosystem is already so open. JavaScript is on the client, it's on the browser, it's in front of people's faces, and to some extent easily reverse engineered. So it makes sense to share and to make it better, right? And in my view, if you can take a technology on the front end of your product and open source it and get it popular and used, and you're ultimately making it better for you and for everybody else. It's almost like outsourcing to the world, right? Is you now have thousands of eyes on your code, finding bugs and building new features and asking for new features, pushing you to potentially make your product better. So I think there definitely is a place for building in public and finding the right balance for what is public and what is intellectual property that drives revenue and product and everything. That it's a delicate balance, but I think it's one that if you can find, can be very beneficial.
Yeah, that's actually one of the interesting parts about this movement, because it's also being adopted by a lot of proprietary products, where the kind of ethos they're going with is about sort of showing what their roadmap looks like, talking about their successes as well as their failures, getting a lot more direct feedback from users. Like, this is one of the things that we really benefit from at Appsmith, which is just a super direct feedback loop, right? Like, you have an open source project, there's a problem in it, you see a GitHub issue tomorrow, your user talks about like why they need this fixed and how it should be fixed. Somebody from your team has no barrier to this user, because they can immediately contact the user, find out about what does a good solution look like, brainstorm it, go ahead and actually implement that. So that feedback loop is just really, really beautiful, and it helps you ship really, really quickly. And you don't even necessarily need to have expose, let's say proprietary part of your code for this. It's just about having that information out there. The other really interesting thing that's happened with this is it's kind of kept us really honest about our mistakes. Like, we've had a lot of good releases and, a couple of bad ones as well, where, we've probably made a mistake, shipped some buggy code. And it's helped us really, rally and be honest with the world that, hey, we've made a mistake. It's time to acknowledge that. And it's time for us to go ahead and fix that right now. That's really important that, we focus on this and not delay, a mistake that we've made. It's really important because now you're in the public and you kind of have to be honest about who you are and what you're doing. So that's been a really interesting part of it. It's helped us rally the community around what we're building and how we're building it.
I see. And maybe I was approaching build in public with a different perspective from the business side. If we're talking about this perspective is very unique, and I would say that most, if not all, of my open source work is done in public. Right? We have Discord channels and chats for everything, and it's very easy to communicate with me and the other maintainers of libraries. Right? And like you said, it's crucial. It's almost required, right? I don't think you can have a successful open source library or endeavor without having that, communication with your audience. And, kind of the crossover kind of from the previous perspective I had to this one, even at Nozzle, we have really tried to kind of adopt these principles as well. We have, a Slack organization for our users. Where we, like you said, we're announcing new products, offering people betas and taking feedback. And this trend of build in public, I guess it kind of is strange to me that it's a trend, because we should have always been doing this, and right. Successful companies have always done this, right? But gathering that feedback and keeping that feedback loop really tight from your users is, that starts from the very beginning at product market fit.
Absolutely. I think open source makes it so much easier because you're able to kind of gather this community around it. And I'm interested in hearing, what do you think about, building a community when you're also building a product? How do you think about investing in these two things? Are they together? Are they separate? Do you have to do different things for them? I'm interested in hearing how you go about doing this for your projects.
Yeah, it definitely comes with time. Like, there's different there are different phases to an open source library and a family of open source products, right? Very early on, it's relatively easy to keep communication asynchronous and just keep that going through GitHub issues, or it's not as often, you won't have as many users, so it doesn't become as big a problem if you understand your audience well and can gather kind of that initial research. But definitely as a project grows and becomes more popular and the users start to grow and you get lots and lots of feedback, building the community, I think, it becomes an extremely important aspect of it, right? Because as far as an open source maintainer goes, you can only do so much to sustain your project and help people out. At some point, you need to help people help themselves, or help them get the answers faster than you can supply them, right? I'm one person and I have one core maintainer for React Query, and he is a machine. His handle is TK Dodo, Dominic Dorfmeister. He's by far the best project maintainer I've ever worked with, right?
Wow.
He's amazing, but even between he and I, there's only so much time that we can devote to answering questions. So, the stronger community that you have around a project, the less that's going to fall on your individual shoulders. There's still things that should fall on your shoulders when they need to, but having a community allows people to learn together. Learn in public. That's another very big movement right now. And it allows them to learn together, ask questions and solve things together, spitball ideas and gather feedback on things before they go through the process of submitting some PR issue or formulating some feature request, right? So it adds more signal to like the discussions around your library than it, and takes noise away from the maintainers.
And how do you go about like encouraging this community? Like in the early days, you're getting a couple of users who are coming in saying they like your product, they're giving you feedback. How do you turn this initial traction, this initial interest, this early user base into a community of people that's surrounding your product, that's helping each other out, that's taking this weight off your shoulder? Like, how do you go about doing that?
I think the most important thing is if you're the maintainer, if you're starting a brand new library, people who are using your library, they want to hang out with you. They want to ask you questions and they want to, feel close to the development of the project. And so, if you want to build a community, like one of your top priorities should be taking part in that community yourself. Like you should be there and you should have a very big presence in your own community. At least in the very beginning, it might just be all you, right? It's kind of like, hey, this is where I hang out now. Come here if you want to chat. Come here if you want to talk about ideas or get help. And in the beginning, you might be offering up more time than you would like to long term, but it's necessary if you want to create, by example, create the atmosphere of freely giving of your time and your help to those in need in exchange for asking your own questions, right?
Right.
I realize that I'm not asking a lot of questions from the people in my Discord other than, hey, are you happy? Or what do you think about these new ideas, right? And in exchange, I hopefully am offering enough insight and, help on using the product. So a community is all about exchanging benefits. And, until that community gets big enough to have kind of this critical inertia where it can kind of start to, the community helps itself, you need to be there holding it up.
Incredible. That makes perfect sense. So basically just make yourself accessible and, hang out with your early users, give them insight into why you're doing what you're doing, and eventually they kind of become your champions.
Right. And, at some point, you're not going to be able to be there all the time, right? When projects get big enough, React Query is big enough and Tanstack is big enough now that I have so many other things that I need to take care of, and the community is big enough now that people can help themselves. One of the ways that you can scale that personalized help beyond this point where it becomes too much is we can, I know this whole other discussion, but getting into open source sustainability, you can offer sponsor perks, you know, hey, become a sponsor and I can give you more time. I can give you, you know, more dedicated conversation time about whatever you want. And, you know, that just because you offered it in the beginning for free doesn't mean you have to keep offering that forever and burn yourself out, right?
Right. Of course. Yeah, that's a really nice insight. And you know, I mean, you're someone who's, you know, had multiple projects, some of which are really popular, like, you know, React Table and React Query. So what do you think sort of you would attribute the growth of these projects to? Is it again like to do some part of this community love that you're seeing early on? What do you kind of feel really made these projects take off?
I mean, I think with a lot of open source, it's there's a lot to be said about, you know, right time, being, you know, the right tool at the right time. And it's not all luck. Part of it is, you know, if you're experiencing a problem that is widespread and decide to build a tool, you know, if you're doing things the right way, you're probably experiencing them at the right time that it needs to be solved. So there's a lot of timing involved. But other than that, I think it's important that anybody who's ready to take on an open source maintainer or creator role needs to understand that there's a large portion of success, as with any industry, that goes to marketing and sales. I know, and I know that's weird to think about open source in terms of marketing and sales, because obviously most open source projects aren't generating the kind of revenue to do those things. But you know, if you want to convince people to use your software, even if it's free, at scale, you need to be able to convince them of, you know, the benefits. You need to have the sales pitch ready to say, hey, you know, React Query can do these things, and it will delete 90% of your asynchronous code, and your user experience will be better, and your developer experience will be better, right? So not only being able to pitch it correctly, but having the tools, capabilities to be able to back up that sales pitch is important. If you can't get people using your library, then it's not going to be successful. So marketing that library becomes important too, and it's difficult because not every corner of the open source market is the same. But at least for the TypeScript, JavaScript, React community, most of us live on Twitter, for better or worse. And I don't know why we have chosen that to be our place, but we have. And you know, I have really over the years learned to use Twitter as a CRM, as a marketing tool, as a way to gather feedback. Like almost, I'd say like 90% of all of the marketing that I do for my open source libraries happens on Twitter. And, you know, even taking it beyond marketing, talking about customer success and, you know, customer and client success, and making sure that people stay happy, right? It's easy to monitor what people are saying on Twitter. And I have a very watchful eye on anything that could be mentioned from an unhappy user for one of my libraries on Twitter. And I take it very personally, not to get offended, but take it personally to make sure that they become happy, right? So noticing, like, taking all the concepts of client and customer success and putting them into open source is going to, again, is another thing that helps you grow. It's one thing if you can get people to use your library, but you want them to stay happy, and you want to make sure that you're keeping them happy and that they don't churn, right? I hate it. I don't hate it. It's funny to use all these terms that you normally use with a business, but that's really what
it's the reality of a project as well. Sorry. I was just
going to say the monetization, like you're still monetizing when you build open source. It's just not always in the form of currency, right? So you're getting something out of it. Either you're getting the technical help from the world, you're getting more visibility because you want to be seen more as a developer, or develop a portfolio or some recognition for yourself, or you simply just need to solve your business's problems, but you want to do it in an open source way. And that, that's how I got into it. And at the end of the day, like, you are monetizing it for something.
Right.
It's just openly beneficial to others.
Yeah, so actually on that point, that's pretty interesting because you also talked about monetization before. So I'm interested in how do you think about monetization for open source, which has traditionally always been thought of as something which was free, right? But today, even Appsmith ourselves, we do plan to eventually, launch like a enterprise edition that we will monetize on. We have a lot of, open source public companies also coming out there. And yeah, I'd just like to hear your thoughts on monetization and how do you think open source projects should monetize?
Yeah, monetization has been, it's a touchy subject when you talk to people who have been doing open source for a while, because I think there's a couple schools of thought. The two that I can think of are, there's open source developers who believe money should never be involved in something like open source.
Yeah.
And then there's another school of thought, and the one that I'm in, is that the spirit of open source should always be there. And, the benefits of open source don't need to change when you introduce monetization into an open source library. Talking about the primary benefits and the things that, you feel from the very beginning, being able to find a tool and install it and become productive. Thinking of that junior developer who doesn't know how to do anything. Like, if you can have a tool that, doesn't interrupt with that regular value of being open and being free to everyone who wants to use it. But then you can also generate enough revenue, and enough is a very important word, generate enough revenue to ensure the long-term viability and success of a project, right? And that is a difficult balance. It's one that is different for everybody. For me, I have gone the route of sponsorship, and it has turned out really well. It's been able to, incentivize me to keep going, where normally I might have felt burnout and decided to leave. The second that you have monetization involved, that feeling of, oh, I'm feeling burnt out, now all of a sudden becomes a driver to say, well, now I want to dig deeper, because I want to make sure that my sponsors are happy, and that I want to deliver a great product so that, I can make some side money and also just stay involved, right? It's a very different feeling. Could you imagine waking up in the morning and going to work and just, thinking everything I'm working on everyone could just possibly stop using it tomorrow, and I wouldn't have any money.
Right.
So that feeling, that's what open source is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not healthy. So when you wake up in the morning and you look at all your issues that you have on your open source libraries, and you think, well, at least we're making some money on this, and there's incentive, and it changes the way you look at your open source work. And I think that it makes it more fulfilling. Obviously, there's something very fulfilling about charitably giving back. And you should always carry that motif in everything that you do with open source. But layering on top that incentive is, that is the fuel that keeps you going when the good vibes of being charitable back to the world, kind of decay a little bit after you've been doing it for 5 years. All of a sudden getting a $200 a month sponsor is reinvigorating, and you're like, wow, let's keep going. And also it's nice to know that, hey, someone else cares about open source this much to do this. So it's important to them, it's important to me. And I think it creates, a synergistic feeling of progress,
Yeah. I think I completely agree with you there. You definitely need something to keep driving a project forward. And about your point of making something that a junior developer could really just use today, that could, help them progress, while at the same time, having clarity on, hey, what could you actually sell to an enterprise that, they could really use and they're happy to pay for. That I think that's a tango that you're always kind of having as an open source developer who's trying to monetize. And one of the points you mentioned really stuck with me, that you wake up to this flurry of issues, and I'm wondering, with projects this popular, I think we have about 1,000 issues itself on Appsmith. How do you go about managing all of these issues?
Oh, having good issue templates and good workflows is extremely important. Issues. I'll tell you one of the best tools that has really helped out issues, Code Sandbox. I mean, if you can set up your development cycle for users to say, unless you submit it with a Code Sandbox that we can replicate this issue, we just don't have time to look at it. We're talking about eliminating swaths of issues every day.
Wow.
That's one tip, because it's a pain to go back and forth with people. Either give me a Code Sandbox or give me a GitHub repo that has one npm command to show me the bug, right? And in that same vein, being able to, you got to have that kind of built into your developer environment too, right? It needs to be easy to create those Code Sandboxes, which is another reason why I create as many examples for my libraries in Code Sandbox as possible. The examples themselves are kept up to date and they're ready for people to show you, oh, hey, here's a bug. You need to check this out, right? So that's one way I think that you can mitigate the flurry of issues that come in, right?
Right.
Got it. I had another one on the tip of my tongue, but it just escaped me.
That's all right.
About it in a second.
So how about we switch gears a bit, to actual, your GitHub repo. There's, when you're an early maintainer and you just built your first project, one of the things that we kept looking at was like our GitHub stars, right? So in your opinion, how important are GitHub stars? Like, do you think that it's just sort of, is it really the sign of a good project, or is it just, a bit of a vanity metric that makes us feel good? What are your thoughts there?
It's definitely an important metric because people make decisions based on GitHub stars. Whether it is the perfect metric is another discussion. I personally think it is a flawed metric, mostly because there's no life cycle to a GitHub star, right? You could go into my GitHub profile and look at all the projects that I've starred, and I'm probably only actively using a very small portion of those, right? And this is the problem, is because once somebody stars a project, there's no follow-up, right? There's no linkage to whether you are actually using or relying on that project. So there are very popular open source tools that were at the height, of their heyday 6 years ago and have tens of thousands of stars. But in reality, nobody uses them today because something else has come along and superseded it, right? And so
things like the activity, the way issues are being closed, the responsiveness, you're saying like you got to factor those things in also.
Yeah, you have to factor everything in. Like the stars are going to help for discoverability, right? They're kind of going to say, like star says, this repo is popular. When it was popular, or if it's popular now, we don't know. You have to keep going, right? And from there, yeah, dig into the issues, the PRs, and honestly, sometimes those aren't even going to tell you much, because there are libraries that just, they have been perfected. They don't need a lot of attention.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And but they're still being very widely used. So from that point, you have to dig even deeper, and you start getting into metrics like NPM downloads, right? Or looking at the dependency graph in GitHub, like what projects rely on this. those two I think are extremely valuable and often overlooked. But the NPM downloads maybe not so much, but NPM downloads is very important. People will say, oh, well, that's flawed too because there's CI installs. I'm like, hey, if you get Vercel using your open source library and they're running your open source CI NPM install on every build, I mean, that is significant. It should be represented. So
that's interesting. Yeah.
It just depends. There's a lot of factors to take into account. There's great websites out there that are trying to aggregate all this stuff and say, okay, we'll give some weight to stars, and we'll give some weight to the GitHub activity and some weight to the downloads. And here's kind of our ranking on where things go. One of my favorites that is working on that is bestofjs.org. I really like this site. It's really simple, but I've often gone to bestofjs.org to find new libraries and look at trending things, more so that I've been to like the trending page on GitHub, because I don't know what the algorithm is on the trending page on GitHub, but it's not one that I like. So like I'm on the bestofjs.org website right now. I'm like, hey, there's this library called Party Down, right? And I remember I just heard about it, but it's like plus 283 stars. But when you go into it, it's like got all the other trends in here, so you can see downloads, you can take a look at further stats, how many contributors do they have, how active is it. So
it's basically it's a sum of all of these different factors basically, and that's it's important to be informed about everything.
And there's a lot of tools out there that do that. So
yeah. Hey, so just I'd like to switch gears to React Table specifically. We use React Table at Appsmith. It's a fantastic project. I'm interested in what led to the inception of React Table. The table is like one of those components that's just widespread all over the web. It's a core component, and there are a lot of other table components also out there. I'm interested in what's made React Table so popular. Why is it so special? I'd just love to hear a bit about that from you.
Yeah, I needed a table in Nozzle a long time ago, and that table component market out there in open source, it wasn't quite there. The best option at the time was AG Grid, which wasn't even called AG Grid. I think it was NG Grid at the time because we were running Angular, right? And they moved to AG Grid. We moved to React. But the problem that I saw with all these tables is that either they were written in React, but they weren't really that great. They controlled too much, or they were not written in React, and the exchange, the interfaces between React and this library just were not great. So even though it supported React, it didn't feel like a first-class React experience. So I said, there needs to be a table library for React. And so I started out building that table library. It was a very naive implementation at first. Like, okay, we're going to render a component. It's got table elements. You give us a column structure. Some of it was inspired from AG Grid's interface, column definitions. And from there, just started building out the different features of, okay, let's add sorting. Let's add filtering, grouping and aggregation, row nesting and stuff. And kind of did all that in a couple of months. And it was all built on like an old, React 15, right? So there were no hooks. The render prop pattern hadn't even really taken off yet. It was just all components. So it was a component, you dropped it in. And it did great. People loved it because you just dropped it in and it just worked. Like it was very performant, and it was a first-class React experience, and it felt wonderful. And then came the issues, right? And these weren't issues about bugs. These were issues about feature requests. Like people wanted to customize the styles and
everything basically
of their table, everything, right? They're like, I want to move this here, and I want to change the styles of this, and I want to change the props on this, and I want to take this out and put my own custom one in.
Exactly.
And there were so many issues about that I finally realized, like, we need to decouple this, right? For those people who want that experience, I want to just give them like the primitives to do it however they want.
So is that why it's headless?
Yeah, and you know what? In the very beginning, I actually wanted to do this before hooks even came out. I
Oh,
started building version 6, which was the headless version, right? I started building that before, or wait, no, we're on version 7. Wait, no, I can't remember.
wow, you have
Anyways,
way too many open source projects going on.
I do. So the first headless version was not written in hooks initially. I started it using render props, and I was like, everything's going to be render props. There's no hooks, because I needed some way to kind of get around the API. And I was like halfway through writing everything into render props, and then they announced hooks.
Okay, wow.
And I was like, back to the drawing board, go, 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 and just took out all the render props and turned them into hooks. And it wasn't too long after hooks came out officially that I released, React Table version, I think it's 7. Wow. So after that, after that, it became totally headless, and there's no markup or styles in it at all.
This is like the main reason why we use React Table and Appsmith, because we really need something that was super customizable, was also feature rich. You had things like pagination, sorting, draggable columns all out of the box, work well with React DND and other libraries out there. And in that sense, we also kind of think of Appsmith as like the easiest way to kind of configure React Table. So like, have you checked it out? Like, what do you think about that? Like, no pressure, but what do you think about us saying that, hey, Appsmith is like one of the easiest ways to just configure React tables?
I totally believe it. React Table itself, as it is today, like there's some setup involved, getting things running. You have to bring a lot of your own UI and a lot of your own styles. And that's totally fine. It gives full control over everything. But if you're looking for a drop-in solution like V6 was or whatever, it's definitely harder to get that. And a lot of people who want that drop-in solution will be fine if they utilize a tool that just wrapped React Table. So the fact that you're packaging it up, dumping it into Appsmith is fantastic. Another great example of this, like GitHub just announced their new feature or their new issues management table view, right? That's all built with React Table too. So, wow. It's really all about building these primitives that can enable more powerful experiences, right? I never really wanted React Table to be this drop-in kitchen sink that's got all the bells and whistles. That's AG Grid's job, and you're going to pay for that experience. Everything comes at a cost. Yeah. So being able to have these low-level primitives and just kind of wrap them seamlessly into your UI library, your application, your product, I think it's invaluable.
Got it. And so Tanner, on that note, since we are on the cusp of October, that for maintainers like us, that means Hacktoberfest is around the corner. For those of you who don't know, Hacktoberfest is the celebration of open source. It's an event held by DigitalOcean during the month of October, where you can contribute pull requests to different open source repositories and win a t-shirt or plant a tree. Tanner, we have like a bunch of things at Appsmith planned for Hacktoberfest. We are giving away hoodies, t-shirts, water bottles for contributing to Appsmith. We're also like changing the contribution game a little bit, because early on contribution was thought of as code contribution, and that was sort of the de facto method. But with low code and Appsmith, we're coming up with multiple modes of contribution. You can build a simple app in Appsmith and just raise a PR and check that app in. You can contribute an integration using an Appsmith app and check that integration in. You can add a widget. You can update our documentation. I think open source has grown so much. The areas of contribution have grown so much, and we are trying to celebrate Hacktoberfest in this way. So I'm just curious, how do you kind of celebrate Hacktoberfest?
Hacktoberfest for me has turned to be more on the receiving end. I remember participating for many years and getting free stuff from DigitalOcean, and it's super great. At this point, I don't need any more free things from open source. What I need is actually on the receiving end is that I love getting people excited about contributing back to my libraries and seeing people either contribute for the first time, to a library that they love. I know there's lots of first-time React users that are using React Query right now. React Query is far from perfect and definitely not done or finished. There's always something that could be improved, whether it's documentation or requesting a feature, submitting a bug, and all those things can be done by people who have only been using the library for just a few minutes. So that's kind of my favorite part of Hacktoberfest now, is seeing people who have never been introduced to the open source world take their first step. And I'm even happier when it's one of my libraries. I'm thrilled to be able to facilitate that excitement.
And what advice would you give to these people who are like just new to open source, looking to raise their first pull request, have a really great successful Hacktober? What are a few tips that you'd give them?
Pick your favorite project. It doesn't matter if it has a lot of issues or not, but pick the one that you're the most passionate about. That's going to be able to get you through to the finish line. And if you pick your favorite project and it's either super, super big and it's got all the help in the world, it doesn't mean that you can't figure out something that you can do to help out that library. And if it's super small and maybe it's perfect, there's not a lot of issues, reach out to the maintainers. Say, hey, it's Hacktoberfest and I want to be helpful. I want to get into it for my first time. How can I do that? And a lot of times if the repo and the maintainers are being smart about it, they have issues that are almost reserved and set up for first-time contributors. I think there's like a GitHub tag you can search for that's first-time contributor. And we want more people to become involved in open source, and we should want more people to become involved in open source. So paving the way for someone to just get in as easily as they can is vital. And there's lots of tools there to help people do that.
Yeah, absolutely. We also have a bunch of good first issues reserved. And, we're looking forward to everyone contributing to both Appsmith and React Table. On that note, Hacktoberfest happens in the month of October, but, open source contributions run all year round. So we're really looking forward to seeing everyone participate in this. Thank you so much for joining us today, Tanner. I think we've had a couple of people live on YouTube asking us a couple of questions. So maybe we can spend the next 10 minutes just answering.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. I think we have Lydia on YouTube who says, do you think you'll do anything in the future with forms? What form libraries do you like?
Oh, let's see. You'll do anything in the future with forms. So maybe not everybody knew this, but in the past, I still have a library called React Form.
Yeah.
It was my second library, maybe after React Table. And I had opinions about how forms should be managed. But while I was building it, after I built it, I used it at Nozzle for a long time, and I still use it in some places, some older code. But there are better libraries out there now. Let this be a lesson to some people who want to get involved in open source. Like, it's okay for there to be a better solution than yours. And React Form, at least as of today, that is the case. There's Formic and React Final Form. And my new favorite, which I think everyone should go check out, is called Informed, INFORMED. And it's built by a good friend, Joe Puzo. He works at Tesla now, and he's just thought about forms inside and out, for the last year and a half or two or something. And he's really done a great job with Informed. And, this next version that he's preparing is going to be the version that I kind of move all of my stuff over to use Informed. I'm really excited about it. So as long as Informed, lives up to everything that I hope it does, and I'm talking to you, Joe, if you're watching. As long as it lives up to everything there, I don't really see a reason why I would need to get back into the form library game. And honestly, I don't know if I want to. Forms are really hard, and I'm very passionate about a lot of problems in the React space, but forms are just one of them that I just want to be solved, and even I do not want to deal with them. So
yeah, forms are really tricky. We've had a lot of problems with them at Appsmith as well. So we have another question for you, Tanner, about what do you think about Strappy, the headless CMS, I think. What are your thoughts on Strappy?
Strappy, I've never used it personally. I know it's an open source CMS. I'm pulling up the website right now just to, I think it's Git based, is it not? I can't remember. Anyway, I'm intrigued. You know, these open source CMSs are pretty prevalent, and it's a hard game to choose like what CMS you're going to use, right? Sometimes I've opted to use tools like Contentful that are just, they have a great free tier. They're easy to use and set up. They're not, you know, they have like, you know, a product behind them. I've considered using other tools like forestry.io and Strappy, but never really gotten into it. I hate to say it, but I just don't have enough experience with it to have an opinion other than I should try it out, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Saad has actually pinged us saying that he's a Strappy user. They've released version 4. Looks like they've announced a whole bunch of plugins. Yeah, I think that's what I really love about some of these headless CMSs, which is their plugin ecosystem, and that's something we really deeply believe in Appsmith as well. We want to encourage more developers to be able to contribute back to the platform as part of plugins. So I think that's something that people are really excited about. People are also interested in what are some of your favorite lesser known open source projects. Probably, I guess something that isn't as popular as React Table, maybe under like 5,000 stars.
Yeah. I don't know if it's under 5,000 stars. I'm actually going to go check. Yeah, it is. Okay. So both of these are under 5,000 stars, but I think that they're pretty great products already. So React Charts is a library that I'm working on currently. It's in beta right now. As you guessed it, it's a charting library. It ironically is not a headless library because headless charts would explode your brain.
I mean, like D3JS.
I've built a lot of data visualization in my days, custom and non-custom, and just for the most part, the less you have to think about charts, the better. So React Charts is kind of like me bringing the Chart.js experience to React natively. It's give us your data, and we'll take care of the rest. And it's going to be a great experience out of the box with very minimal configuration. I hope you get that vibe with React Query and React Table too. So check out React Charts. All I need to do is really fix a few bugs and write the documentation, and it's ready to rock and roll. So look forward to that release. But you can go use it now. Just if you ship it to production, lock down to the specific beta.
I think that's going to be our next widget on the platform.
Nice. Another one worth mentioning is React Virtual. React Virtual is a virtualization hook. Right. Usually you see virtualization libraries use components because they have to control a lot of things. Virtualization as a hook is really cool. You can use the same single hook to do both vertical and horizontal virtualization. You can even combine them to create grid experiences. But it has static and dynamic and variable sizing algorithms for keeping things correctly sized.
And there goes our list widget. So we're going to implement infinite scrolling in our list with exactly this library.
So you can combine React Virtual with React Query to get virtualized lists that are really long. You can implement it with React Table to virtualize your rows there. Virtualization is just really handy in a lot of different places. So that's another library. And a few more that maybe that are really not known that well are, let's see, I have one in mind, but I want to make sure I tell you the right name. React Ranger is a fun one. React Ranger is a tool for building multi-range sliders. So you got a slider and you want more than one knob, you want to use React Ranger. And it's headless. You can create as many range points as you want, put them onto anything that you want. It's really
customizability seems to be king. Like everyone wants to customize everything today, especially when it comes to visuals.
Yeah, and another one that maybe is more up and coming instead of like, hey, you should go use this today. But something that I'm definitely working a lot on is a library called React Location. And it is a router that I'm actually using in production at Nozzle. And it's inspired by, React Router, Reach Router, Louder, a lot of router tools. I've used all of them, and I've kind of brought together my favorite concepts from all of them, and then added a couple of features on top that I think are important for companies who are doing more in the route in the URL location bar than just, a path.
Yeah.
If you're doing anything with storing state in the URL for shareable, linkable URLs, you're going to be interested in React Location. And in the future, if you have any interest at all in typed URL schemas, or backwards compatible, bookmark support, you're going to be interested in React Location coming soon. So
Very cool.
be sure to keep an eye on that one. I think there's a lot of great utilities in React Location that, where a lot of other routers kind of just say, that's not our responsibility.
Yeah.
You're kind of on your own. React Location steps in and says, okay, we got a first-class solution to help you manage state in the URL.
Got it. Hey, thanks. That's fantastic. These are really great recommendations. All of which.
And Swimmer.
And Swimmer. Okay. What does Swimmer do?
Swimmer is, actually, I never really mentioned this to anybody, but I just remembered it. Swimmer is a task pooling and throttling utility. So it, if you have a huge list of tasks or a huge list of things that you need to, throttle and say, okay, I have 100 items, 100 functions, but I can only run 3 at a time. It handles all the asynchronous queuing and retries and pooling, I guess you could say. You can create reusable pools and queues for handling asynchronous tasks. Pools. That's what I call the Swimmer.
Really nice naming.
Yeah, but it's just npm install Swimmer, or you can go to my GitHub and look for Swimmer. But it's kind of a fun library. I use it in some cases.
Okay, so we're actually pouring in with a couple of questions from YouTube. So one user wants to know, okay. So are you a proponent of test-driven development?
Of test-driven development?
Yeah.
No.
No.
I mean,
okay.
I'm not a proponent. I don't do it myself. Is it a good idea? It really just depends on what style you want to follow, right? There's some people that will say you shouldn't write a line of code until you've written the test for it. That is definitely not the way that I code. There's people that say, write the tests as you write the feature.
Yeah.
And I'm more of the person that is like, hey, let's write the library, let's write the code in TypeScript and make sure it's theoretically sound, and then let's write the tests that prove that it does what we want it to do.
Got it.
I'm not a big buff on testing. If you have any testing questions, you should probably go ask Kent. Kent
Okay.
He's so
yeah.
Just go ask Kent and he'll tell you how to approach testing.
So Anthony Grand has a question. What is the future of React Table, and is React Table Pro something you're still working towards?
Hi, Anthony. It's good to see you again. Me and Anthony go back. We've been talking for a long time about React Table. So React Table version 8, I think those are the right versions, but React Table, the next big version of React Table, I'm still working on it, but it's getting really close. It's all written in TypeScript. It's all completely TypeScript from top to bottom. The API has changed a little bit. They are breaking changes, but most of it builds on top of what you're used to in version 7. And the hope is that as React Table, this next version kind of solidifies React Table as a really wonderful low-level primitive that you can build tables with. My plan is to eventually, within the next year or two, release React Table Pro. And React Table Pro will be a drop-in table system. It will still offer a lot of customization. that you would expect from any of my libraries, be able to replace anything, rearrange anything. But it will be more of a, I need a table right now that works, and I don't care, too much how it looks, or the behaviors can be relatively simple. Imagine an AG grid experience,
Right.
and it will use React Table under the hood, obviously, but it will ship with great features. Like it will have virtualization and great pagination UIs built in. It will have wonderful support for UI filters and sorting, and hiding and showing columns, and dragging columns.
Something a little bit more opinionated out of the box that you learned with your experience, that, hey, this is what kind of makes sense for a really popular kind of.
Honestly, it might bring together everything that I've created. It could use React Query for fetching.
Right.
It could use, charts, React charts to visualize aggregations that you make. It will use React Virtual for sure to do all the virtualization. So yeah, kind of a cocktail of the TAN stack. And that's a ways off, but that's definitely something I still hope to do. All of this stuff is just, when will I be able to do it? So
yeah, absolutely. Speaking of which, we're nearly out of time, so we'll just take one last question. So Lydia Hendricks has a question on, what are your thoughts on Next.js? Is it worth moving from CRA to Next for a gated app?
Yep.
Simple question and simple answer. Yes, it is worth it.
If you're using Create React App, then you should probably move to Next or to Vite. I can't remember how. I think it's Vite. You should move away from Create React App. I haven't used it in a long time. So you get a lot of benefits, even if you're doing a gated app that it isn't doing any SSR, just rewriting everything to index.js, then Next.js is going to be very useful. I can also see the next question there if you want. I saw somebody said, how do you get these nice NPM package names? We'll have that be the last question. I ask people for them.
Wow.
Wow, huh?
That's a pro tip.
No, I like self-explanatory names that are going to be easy to remember, but specific enough to have good SEO and good branding. And if it's taken and it's actively used, then I just find a different name. But if it's taken on NPM, but it hasn't received an update in 5 years, you just email the owner and say, hey, I'm building a new library. Can I use it? And 9 times out of 10, they're like, yeah, sure. Here you go.
Wow. Wow, that's really nice. Yeah, I guess like
I did this just last week for a new library that I.
Was it for Swimmer?
For what?
Was it for Swimmer?
No. No, this is a new library. I'm not announcing it yet, but.
Okay. Wow, really excited to see what else you're gonna launch, Tanner. Thank you so much.
If I can handle it. It's no promise that anything's actually gonna come out, but you got to get it just in case.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for your time. It was a real pleasure, having you here with us, and just talking to everybody about your experience as an open source maintainer, having built many successful projects, talking to us about open source and Hacktober. Really excited to see the things you launch in the future. And we cannot wait to integrate more and more of these amazing projects that you keep launching.
Thanks. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, guys. Thanks a lot, Tanner. Sorry, we overshot by about 5 minutes there.
No, you're good. I think you're still live streaming.